Welcome back, everybody, to your daily update on the state of the Malazan Empire. And today we're gonna finish book 3 of Reaper's Gale. That's right, I'm done with it. We're gonna have us a few discussions about the fall of capitalism, because it's something I'm partial to, and a lot of other stuff. And tomorrow we're gonna start out with book 4, Reaper's Gale. Book 4 of Reaper's Gale, and that's going to be fun as well. And I'll be back with some knitting stuff real soon as well. I'm just, figuring out a design and getting measurements together and actually buying new wool because I need a different yarn for that new project. So yeah, there's that. And let's see how this goes. Cheers. All right, so I just read the last two chapters, chapter 17 and chapter 18. When you look at both of them, it's interesting to see that chapter 17 is completely focused on happenings on the Malazan side, and chapter 18 is happening on the... most of our viewpoint characters are typical Lethery characters. And chapter 17 is mostly war. It's mostly different, like the thing that Erickson does so good when he has like these huger combat scenes kind of thing going on that we saw in Igatan, and we saw a bit of it at the beginning of the landing here in Reaper's Gale. And basically these montages where we jump from the mind and viewpoint, or mind and viewpoint and experience of one soldier to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, to see them all reflecting on the same events from their personal experience, from their personal background, and the way they think. And those are just so extremely well done to show in a way. We've spoken about the whole idea of show don't tell and all of that, but he does that so very well. It's a sort of cinematic way to do it, but also not. And the great thing that you achieve with that way of doing it is that you give us background of all these different soldiers. They're all regular soldiers. You're average, there's a sergeant or a corporal in there from time to time, but all of them are basically just average men, average women, average soldiers. They're all there, and the interesting thing there is emergence in a way. Like what you achieve with that is emergence, because what you see when you have all these different viewpoints that are all focusing on the same event that is not ever spoken out aloud, what you get instead is you get all these different facets of that feeling, of that mood, of that event. In this case, the event being the race of the Marines towards Letheras. You get all of that through these myriads of little facets, like an I don't want to say mosaic, it's more like a kaleidoscope kind of thing. I mean, you see all of these different facets, and through all these different facets, the overall image reveals itself in a way. And Erickson is just really good at doing that. And that's mostly that. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of the other thing there is that he shows that almost all of the characters that we have there, all those soldiers, or at least almost all of them. We've seen that with some of the ones that we got back in Igatan when we had these flashbacks when they're under Igatan, and now we have that again. We have all these like small bits back from their past, and some of them connect with each other. Some of them don't really connect that much. It shows us their background. It shows us how almost all of them have something broken in a way, something Yes, something broken in a way in their past. You have Smiles going with her, like fleeing the sacrifice, the religious sacrifice of her sister in a way, and how that damaged her. We saw way more about that with Korik before. He's very much closed off to us at this point. You have, yeah, we have all these different aspects there, and that's um, just well done. And I feel it's important to keep in mind that a lot of the people that we're dealing with here are, in a way, damaged people that are very much broken, damaged people that have put themselves together. But the cracks sometimes show, and they'll always show. And now we've spoken about that before in a way when we have obviously spoken about the crippled god, and you have all these pictures of the crippled god and his deck of dragons that have slight flaws and all of that. And the question that we should start asking ourselves, and we'll see probably more of that, and it's something that I feel is a lens to look through on the way to what will go on in the future, is how the fact that these people, these bone hunters, are all slightly flawed in their way, or majorly flawed. How that connects to them interacting with the crippled god, which obviously is something that, will happen sooner or later, is happening quite literally right now when they're conquering the empire run by, run by the Lethery, but figureheaded by the very direct. Is he king of chains? I have no idea what what his official rank is, right? In the House of Chains, is he king of chains or good friend roulette singer? I don't know. But the point is, we'll have to see how that compares to that, and who's on whose side, basically. Now, there's an interesting idea that I will not talk about now. Sorry. What else do we have in that part? We have that. We have a bit more flashbacks on the marine munitions. Although there remains the question in my mind, is like, how did Fiddler and Hedge ever test out the cussers, and if they couldn't actually throw them far enough? How did that all work out without a lot of casualties or civil casualties? Because apparently the only casualty we hear about is an hay wagon, and even the farmer was apparently well enough to be paid off. So yeah, there's that. That I'm not going to talk about. But what else do we get in there? We see that the Marines have come to realization that they need to adapt to adapt to the situation, that Lethery and Tistedur are working together. We've seen that. And I guess one lesson to be learned from that is that, like, the person who first figured it out didn't actually figure it out at the beginning. That was Hellion with her, like, decision to go from bar to bar and go fast because of Hellion being Hellion. And there is something to be said about Hellion at some point, but I'm not sure if I'm qualified to do that. But yeah, we'll see. There's also, I feel, more to be said about Beak and the depiction of Beak as a character. But I once again don't feel qualified to do it right now or in any proper way. But yeah, that whole thing moving on. Like, I really felt bad for those two Kenrila demons, or Kenrila. I keep confusing which is which. Anyway, those two brothers that we remember from Midnight Tides, and they get like their small backup in a way, small encore here when they just wanted to be farmers, which there is slapstick humor, and still in that is pathos, because they wanted to be peaceful farmers and then they get at least hurt a lot. I mean, yeah, they also aggressively try and kill one of the Marines, but it still is like, it kind of reinforces, but in a more comic way, the general idea of how humans or Tist-Edur abuse demons who are just people from another world. So there's that. Although them obviously being nobility, demon nobility, kind of puts in that point where you can talk about them not understanding a lot of things because they're not the ones doing the work back where they're from, although they're probably fighters back there. I mean, yeah. So yeah, there was that, and there's one more thing about that whole episode that I feel is interesting to be talked about. And that is how the drum is depicted within the book, right? We know Erikson does not shy away from gruesome, detailed descriptions of bloodshed. We already know that there's depictions of violence in there that are very, very explicit, where we are told about all the smells that death makes, when we are told about all the colors, all the smells, all the feelings, and so forth. But in this point where you have that huge explosion that takes out everyone, Erikson steps back and just gives us the results through the senses of Bottle, who is sensing back, and it's just like pain and death moving away, and a lot of pain. And we just see in a way, see the dust on the horizon. We hear the thunder, we see the dust, we feel the pain, but we don't see all the gruesome details. And I feel it's interesting to look at that. And there might be in general something that I want to talk about the depiction of violence within fantasy stories. That is something that I found very interesting, how it got more explicit and more gory in a way over time, and why that may be and why that may not be. Because when you look back at, I don't know, I'm just currently on the side kind of rereading a bit of Tolkien, and he depicts mass slaughter all the time, but it's very often on a very abstract scale. We've moved down from that abstract scale. Same with even someone who has a lot of very explicit fight scenes in there, like Robert E. Howard. We usually don't get actual gory details of violence within something like Conan the Barbarian. Not in the way that you see it in your modern fantasy ever since. Yeah, that's a good question. Ever since. It's certainly been back on the table, so to speak, with someone like George R. R. Martin or Joe Abercrombie or what's his name, Richard K. Morgan, or others of that whole modern contemporary, slightly more edgy or pushing the envelope kind of fantasy. We have seen that much more there, but anyway, I feel there's more in there that I'm not understanding. I just feel that Erikson at that point not giving us all the grisly details and leaving all of that up to our imagination is doing two things at the same time. It's on the one hand, because we know that killed 100 soldiers or more at that point. And in the combination with first having Fiddler having this small point where he reminisces about how him and Hedge, his best friend, basically, how they just played with all that stuff because they're the kind of people who want to play with dangerous shit. And I sympathize. I get it. There is something to that, and I totally appreciate that. But how that then has that result on the other hand, which is, yeah, something that two boys basically fiddling around with dangerous toys come up with something that then will just take away 200 people at the same time. And that's, there is something in there when we talk about how people who do science often don't think about the ramifications of what that results in the end. And on the other hand, the thing that I like to think is that by leaving it up to our imagination, and on the other hand, not giving us that voyeur style of look of this mass murder, because it's mass murder if you just blow up 200 people, even though it's war. But like doing the two things. It's like on the one hand, it's sort of giving some dignity to the people that die in that rather technical kind of way, because there's no one there when that whole thing starts. So there's some dignity to that, but on the other hand, it leaves it up to us how we imagine that, and there's something to that I feel makes the drum, that depiction of the drum at least, much more effective that way than if we'd actually, had the usual, there's bits of meat flying around kind of depiction for that. So yeah, I feel that's sort of most of what can be said about the Marine stuff. They're just like the sheer craft of how that makes all these soldiers human. Then on the other hand, showing us how they do something totally inhuman, and how it, gives them all their small flaws and nicks and all the scratches they've taken over time, because life is brutal to almost everybody. So yeah, that's just, I feel, most that can be taken away from this bit. Obviously, there's more. The other thing that I found interesting there is the depiction of that, or that scene within the on Second Maiden Fort with Sheikh Brulik and the council between Adjunct Tavora and then Yantovis and even Shurk Elal. And like the only one missing there at that point is basically Mortal Sword Krukava from the parish, right? My point there is that in that room, there's a bunch of dudes sitting around doing very dumb things, like Sheikh Brulik leering at Malazan Gilani, but the actual power in that room, the decisions in that room, are made by these women. They're made by the queen of the Sheikh, who can just stroll in there and just kick or get Sheikh Brulik kicked out because it's her decision to do that. On the other hand, you have the adjunct, Tavora, who is in charge of that entire invasion. And then there's Shurk Elal, who's doing her kind of thing. But the actual decisions in that entire scene, on which arguably really hangs like the entire future of Letheras at that point, all of those are made by women. And that's just something that I don't even know if I realized it when I first read it, like the first time round. But that's like, even for a fantasy book written in like 14 years ago, I think it was released in 2007. That was incredibly, I guess, not incredibly, but sadly, this was still rather like an outlier, I guess, in a way. And I just, it's not exactly new to actually go out there and explain how a lot of like the usual gender imbalance that you find in epic fantasy, or have found in a lot of epic fantasy over the decades, is deliberately not present within the Malazan Book of the Fallen, or the novels of the Malazan Empire for that matter. But it's these scenes where I feel it comes through the most, because it's made in a way I definitely didn't realize it unless I really like consciously thought about the fact that there is like all the important decisions here are made by women. Like even the Empire in the end was, like, when we left it, was ruled by a woman, right? There's something to keep in mind there. That it is done in a way where it's not actually needs to be pointed out or made especially important or anything. It just happens that you have like a war council and all the chief players who actually make the decisions are women in there. So that's cool. I do really appreciate that. That's should happen more often. I feel. So let's move on to Letheras. And oh boy, things are falling apart on a lot of levels. I'm not going to say that Karas Invictat reminds me more and more of Adolf Hitler, because that's not a comparison I'm comfortable with. But there is something to it. Anyway, I feel the interesting things to look at within this are, on the one hand, the depiction of Triban Gnol, who is a despicable human being. Also one that has obviously, and we've spoken about that before, and I feel that's something that we need to come back to again and again, is the perpetuation of crimes through generations. And that's exactly what Triban Gnol is sort of the kind of like example for. Plus, obviously, overconfidence, something else that we've spoken about before. Same in a way with Karas Invictat there. Like, everyone in there is still fighting for themselves over each other, like over advantage. Like, well, I mean, we've known that before. That's sort of the Letheras society, which is very much about capitalism, about a capitalist individualist ideology, which is what drives Letheras. It's like the idea of monetary wealth being a sign of predestination, being a sign of divine approval, and that all put down on an individual level. That's sort of what drives that society. And it obviously is not a good thing, because we see where it goes. And we see these different characters all being absolutely despicable, and then still being despicable to each other. And it's like something that you find a lot in other books. I just feel it's made in a way here where I feel it's done in a way where you're like, yeah, I absolutely hate Triban Gnol. He's an evil man. He's an absolutely evil man. He also is in the process of ruining his empire because of because of who he is. And that's the point. I still feel, up to a certain point, I feel bad for him, because he didn't have like a really happy childhood. He didn't have like an easy way at that point. He's haunted by his past and by his trauma. He obviously took the wrong decision, took the wrong way. And that's despicable and morally bankrupt, and I don't want to say problematic. That's just evil. That's true. But still, you know, that question of, could things have been better? Could things have gone differently? That's sort of where we need, which I find interesting to look at there. Now with Karas Invictat, is less like personal. It's more the general idea of that, like, inequality creates obviously hatred from both sides. You have the very rich despising the very poor. You have the very poor despising the very rich. Each of those groups thinks that's like the chasm within society is something that we see in our world all the time. It's like you have every side thinking the other side is despicable, morally bankrupt, and dumb. And that all those are always like thought are obviously the big problem. We'll come back to that at some point, I guess. Yeah, it's just something that we see here. Then I feel like the last big thing that we need to talk about here is, I'll try to keep it short for today. The end of Bug's construction, the bankruptcy of Bug's construction, and the collapse of the collapse of the Leathery financial system. There's two things to talk about there. There's that long debate between the advocate and Bug that might warrant an entire analysis at some point. Maybe even in an economics class and not in not in here. So there's that. With all its moral implications, with obviously the thing that we've spoken about, that nowadays we might all hopefully agree on, that in a place with limited resources, in a system with limited resources, unlimited growth is an illusion. It's not going to happen. We know that. The other important lesson we learned there, and something that we can all take to heed, is that the survival of our species is not exactly part of that game, right? We as a species can just wipe ourselves out. It has happened before in a lot of ways, and we see that we saw that happening in the Malazan world with the Talani mass, right, where they overhunted, and that is basically what drove them into their situation. We have all these things before, but it takes that debate between a very angry elder god and a very cold-blooded advocate to actually put it down on the table, because Bug simply just doesn't really care if humanity survives, because he's seen it before. The other bit in there is the critique of cynicism, that the true cynic would use their intelligence to play that game. And we've seen that once again done with Tehol. Yeah, Tehol warrants a lot of talk at some point. But the idea that, yes, the true cynic is using their powers, is using their superior or at least existing advantages, whether they there is always a part of those advantages will always be superior intelligence, or at least average intelligence, maybe a bit more, in combination with a lack of morals. And that's the point, the lack of morals within the cynics. The cynic sees the system as fucked up and decides to not change it, but use it to his advantage, his or her advantage, to their advantage, to actually at least get a pleasant life out of it. Now, there is a question there, whether that is completely morally wrong or not. That's why I never took ethics, because I figured that's all too complicated and gets too personal too soon. But there it is. And we see that in there. We see the example of the true cynic in the advocate. And now you have that very enraged moral debate between Tehol Benedict and Janath. Where she is amazed by the fact that that Tehol is apparently willing to go all the way to prove his point this time around, to really literally go all the way. I will not go so far as to make that full analogy here yet. I feel that's something we need to talk about later on. But there's the very, very powerful moral or literary image in there that we'll see later, I guess, some more of. Anyway, those are those things. The other thing I feel is that this is one of the more, the debate between Bug and the Advocate, and the debate between Tehol and Janath, are some of the most angry parts, or most angry dialogues within the Malazan Book of the Fallen. There's a lot of pent-up anger in there. And they're kind of prophetic when you look at when the book was released, compared to our last big financial crisis of certain things collapsing. And when you consider that a lot of that was actually built on property prices and stuff like that, the fact that it is Bug's construction lends it an almost, I don't want to say prophetic quality, but definitely something that I'm not sure if people who read that book at its actual release appreciated or were able to appreciate. I don't know that, but it certainly, like in hindsight, when you look at it, it certainly shows a lot of like a very keen eye of Stephen Erickson when it came to the situation of our, or at least the most like well that no the global actually, but mostly the American financial system, and that's just something to keep in mind when you look at that. So there's that. I feel that sort. Oh no, the shit. There's more. We need us to talk about Hedge and Imrath's death, and her and the crime that Hedge thought he was committing, and the crime he actually committed or feels he committed afterwards, which is like heart wrenching in a way. And it's even more heart wrenching for us at this point. We'll see how Hedgecon like works with that, because we have seen what kind of change it wrought in Onrak to become alive again. And the question is, would Imrath, if she actually, had been returned to full life just like Onrak did, through entering into the refugium, would she still have gone and done the crippled gods bidding, or would she also just have been another life IMAS with no further like would that not also have ended her like connection to the crippled god? We don't know that. It certainly makes that whole debacle there hurt more, I feel. It also is like, once again, people not talking things out properly can lead to dumb fuck ups and tragedy. Something that we've learned before. There's also a lot like to be said about the dialogues between Quickben and mostly Quickben and Onrak in that scene before, like when Troll just comes back and is relieved that Onrak is no longer just smiling. There's something in there that I feel bears closer study in a way. I'm not going to do that today. I am running out of brain power. It's been a long day. I've been doing a lot of carrying around boxes and stuff. So there's that. Anyway, I think that's it for today. I'll be back tomorrow with Reaper's Gale Book 4, Part 1, and we'll stay with Reaper's Gale until the end of the week, I think. Because there's still a lot of Reaper's Galing to do. Anyway, until then, I hope you have a great... What's it today? Tuesday. Great Tuesday. Do something fun. And I'll talk to you tomorrow. Until then, cheers.